as we get back into this, just two things for you. First of all, the first set of assignments, the assignments for Chapter 3, are due today. Okay? I probably won't get to them till this weekend. So if you have them into me by Friday, that's not a problem. All right? And going along with that, John, who's raising his hand right now, one of the lab assistants will be here most, if not all day on Friday. So he gets lonesome. And a lot of times he doesn't have very many people here, so if you want some one-on-one attention, I realize Friday may not always be the best day for people, but it's the only day that classes aren't scheduled in here. Your next two assignments will again be the enhanced BMI and the distance converter. We'll look at both those before the period's over. They're due to 2 weeks from today, like as I told you. So now next week will be lab for the entire week. All right, so going back to where we were in here looking at this stuff, if you go in and notice it says anytime a radio button is check properties or a checkbox is check property changes, a check changed event happens. So the author has this program in here. It's kind of a cool little program. It's called Color Theme. And you'll notice, I believe the way that this one's set up is if you click yellow, that I think what's going to happen is the background turns yellow, red it turns red, white it turns white, and then whatever he set it to for normal, if you click normal. All right. So it's another one, and he goes through and he talks about the different property settings that he had, and he gives you the code. All right. So again, I think this is another example that's in here. The only thing that might look a little funny in here is when you see the word this. We've looked at it once earlier in the semester, but this actually means what you're currently talking about. Technically it refers to the current object. So it says here, if the red radio button is clicked, then this is the red radio button. So instead of having to say red radio button dot back color, all right, or actually this in this case would be the form. So instead of saying the name of the form dot back color, you say this. And we use this, no pun intended, but we've been using it since the beginning of the semester. If you remember with our exit button, saying this dot close to close the form. This is the same, set up the same way. All right, two more things are discussed in this chapter, and the first is the switch statement. Okay, now if I did something like this, and I'm just going to show you this quickly. So if I came through here, and let's say I wrote int x equal 3, all right? And then again, I have some code in here. I don't care what it is, all right? And then later on, if I write something like this, switch x, whoops, case 0, you know, and I'm just going to put a comment here, do something. Case 1, that should be a colon there. Do something else. And I can have as many of these as I want, and then I can eventually say default, do something other than that. And when I get done with this, at the end of each one of these, I want to put in the word break. It's not mandatory that you put in the word break after a default. The default must come at the end, but I'm going to put it in anyway, and then a curly brace. So why am I taking the time to show you this? All right, because this right here, this is another way of writing this. If x equal 0, do something. Else, if x equal 1, do something else. Else, do something other than that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these curlies that I normally put on a line by themselves, And I'm going to move them up so we can see all of this together. All right. So the idea behind this and the idea behind showing you this is to show you that really what you can use and what some people like, the reason that some people like to use and say switch statement, because it's sometimes your code is a little cleaner to read than doing the same thing as an if. All right, so we're going to look at that in just a second, but it's another way of writing a series of if-else statements or if-else-if statements. All right, so with that in mind, again, I don't want to read to you. It's a multiple alternative. So there's an idea. And what you switch on doesn't have to be a number. It used to be in most languages when you use a switch, whatever you switched on had to be a number. Not only that, it had to be a whole number. It had to be an integer. But I can switch on month, and I could say case 1, display January, case 2, etc. And if you didn't put in something between 1 and 12, that would be the default. And what's nice about that is he shows you that example, then he shows you how to write it. And then he shows you basically how you'd actually code that. Again, that's why I like using this guy's book. All right. So it's switch. This is what you're switching on. In this case, month would have to be an integer. If it was a 1, you'd do a message box that said January, a 2, February, etc. Now, all we're handling in here are the first 3 months. But you could move it up, and you could put case 4, case 5, case 6, etc., all the way through case 12 if you wanted to do that. There's also nothing that says you have to put these in order. Most people do that because it's easier to see it when it's in order, but you don't have to. All right? But what if I did something like this? All right, so I have this right here, and instead of this being, I'm going to just grab this one and copy it. First of all, I like to put some spaces in here, but we're real close, so I'm just going to stop right there. All right. What if instead of what if 1 was this? Let's assume we're doing something for a 4-year school. Freshman, 2, sophomore. I don't know if that's spelled right. I don't care. Does that make sense to everybody? You know, you would think that's the way you'd want to do it. Freshman, then sophomore, then junior, then senior. But remember, you always want to make it as simple on the computer as possible. So if for some reason, okay, you've got, let's just say that you've got a lot more juniors and seniors. So let's assume you've got a lot more juniors and seniors than you do freshmen and sophomores. There is absolutely nothing that stops you from doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. All right? And the way that this works, let's go back and put it so it was the way we had it to begin with, just because, again, it's usually a little easier for the human psyche to. So it says, is this a 1? If it is, it does this. And break means get the heck out of here. It means leave the case. If I left those breaks off, so imagine all these in blue here. Imagine I removed all of them. And it was a 1. It would still say freshman, then it would say sophomore, then it would say junior, then it would say senior, then it would say error invalid. So you have to put the break in there. All right, and he does a pretty good job of explaining that in the chapter right here. And again, he says that using that is the same as doing it with an if statement. All right. Then the last thing that's in here are list boxes. And I just want to show you a couple things about list boxes because, again, I'd been kind of running through a couple simple programs with you. And I'm going to remove this and stick in a list box. This one's a little different, and I want you to notice something. If everybody in the class, would you please all look up on here? Because this is the first time I think that you've seen this. See that little thing up there that looks like an arrow? That's called a smart tag. And what it means is if you click it, it'll bring up more information. Now, the use data-bound items we don't talk about much in here because that's if you wanted to hook something onto a database. But notice if I click in Edit Items, and And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in the members of my family. Got to include the dog. All right. So you can see what happened when I did that. That's a way that I can automatically fill that up. Okay? Well, if I don't want to do it that way, I can do it in code as an example. All right, so I could, if I wanted to, do it in code. But if you go over here, what you're going to notice, and I always forget where it is, but there's something over here that has the collection of list box. It's called items. And notice if I click that, I get the same thing. So there's different ways that you can fill this up, or you can fill it up in code. If there's absolutely nothing in the list box, then what the list box has is whatever name it is. Okay? And a list box, when you set this up, it's designed for a small list of things. What ends up happening when you go and you are writing a form is sooner or later you've got a list box and you've got maybe one of these combo boxes over here that we'll talk about in a different chapter. And you've got a couple check boxes in here, and you've got, etc. You got a label over here, and you've got 2 or 3 buttons. What ends up happening after a while when you do this stuff is your screen starts to get cluttered. You go, yeah, Jeff, that's why you told us to go and do this and make it bigger. Yeah, but sooner or later it might still be way too cluttered. So if you've got a small number of choices and you want the user to be able to see everything, like the example I just showed you with freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, a list box would be a good example. All right. Most of these things that we talk about in this chapter, you could use one or the other. It just depends on what it is you're trying to do. So it says it displays a list of items, and you can set it up. By default, it's set up to single select. So you can only select one from this list box and one from this list box. By default, that's the way it's set up. But if I click on here, there's somewhere in here, there is a thing that's called, I think it's called multi-select, multi-column, no. But there's some kind of a selected thing in here, all right, that it'll allow you to do multiple selection. Also notice it's got a nice thing in here that says sorted. All right, right here, everybody see that? It's set to false, but if I set it to true, then I come back over to my Smart tab, and I put in the members of my family again. And I click OK, you'll notice they're now in alphabetic order. All right, so it automatically puts things in sorted order for you. Sometimes people like that. It depends on what you're trying to store in there. If you want to store the thing that you put in there last, you want that to come out first. All right. Those of you who are in the database class, I don't know if you've started doing order by yet, but you will. All right. And if you want to do it order by, you wouldn't want to do it that way. All right. Unless you wanted it in alphabetic order. But if you wanted it in the latest order, you wouldn't do this. So he gives you an example. He shows you a lot of the stuff that I talked about, and this is what I want to mention. Selected item, and there's another thing that's called selected index. All right, that's in here someplace, but I just don't see it right now. What I want you to understand is, right now, if you look in there, for example, Chloe, if I grab that, that's the selected item. Does that make sense? But the selected index is actually 0 because it starts counting with 0. So if I come through here and I remove all these names, I remove all of them. So it looks like this again. Now the selected index is automatically equal to -1. So if you've got a list box where the selected index is equal to -1, it means there's nothing in there. All right. It can mean something else too, but we'll talk about that at another time. There's nothing in there. All right. So there's different things that you can do with this. There's different properties that you can set. The major ones that you'd probably deal with are discussed in the book. All right. Now that's all he talks about, but I want to go back to this program that I put out here. Not this one, but in fact I'm going to close this. But this demo program that I was showing you, if I can remember which one it was, I don't think it's that one. Yep, Chapter 4 demo, that one. And in particular, I want to show you the code behind favorite sport, and the code behind favorite pizza, and the code behind favorite day. All right, so favorite sport. Here's the code. Very similar to what the author showed in the book. If radio button football dot checked, then do this. Else if that button dot checked, then do that. Else if that button dot checked, then do that. Else you didn't choose one. But remember, with radio buttons, they're mutually exclusive. I use if and I use else, if, and else, because only one of them can be true. Okay? So these that you see right here, that's the stuff that's going to handle whether I pick football, baseball, basketball, or none of them. All right? The second one, it's possible I could choose cheese and pepperoni and veggie and the works. I could choose all of them. The reason I'm telling you that is notice with this one, they're all ifs, not else ifs, because they're not mutually exclusive. Okay? I could have literally set this up, and I started to do it that way, and then I just thought I'll just leave it the way it is. I spelled cheese wrong. All right? But this says if the checkbox for cheese is checked, say your favorite pizza is cheese. But it's possible with this, again, remember, you can set more than one of these. So in here, I can only set one. So there's either, bless you, there's either none set, in which case it says no favorite sport chosen, or there's football, or there's, or there's baseball, or there's basketball. All right? But in here, I can set none, which will say none, or I can set one, or I can set any two, or any three, or all four. All right? So when you look at that code, that's got to be in if statements, because not only do I not know how many are chosen, but let's clear this. I can choose pepperoni first and say, yeah, I like the works too. So I have no idea if I'm going to put it and cheese, and so I have no guarantee that when I do this, I'm going to select them in an order. I could select them in a random order. So that's why you see this code. Oops, not that code. Stop the running. Right here. And also notice how I accounted for if nothing was chosen. There, that's nothing chosen for the radio button. And here I've got a Boolean variable that I set to true called none checked. But if I check one, I immediately set that to false because one's been checked. But if I get down to the bottom, and if none checked is still true, nothing was checked. All right. Then what I decided to do for the last one was to put in a switch statement so you could see it. All right, so I've got favorite day. If it's set to -1, if it's not equal to -1, that means there's a favorite day listed. So as it says, Sunday, your favorite day is Sunday, Monday, etc., all the way down. A default, no favorite day chosen. So what I tried to do in this programming example here was to show you an example of radio buttons, how to create them, how to clear them, check boxes, how to create them, how to clear them, and list boxes, how to create them, how to clear them. And as far as the clear goes, notice what's in here. To clear a radio button, I set check to false for all of them. All right? For my checkbox, I set check to false for all of them. Same thing. All right? And then for the list box, all I do is I set that equal to -1, which means nothing's been chosen. There's other properties you can work with in here. There's like count properties, and there's other ways that you can do this. But for now, I think at least, the way he shows it in the book on about pages 240 through about 260 or so, or 261, they probably make the most sense as far as what we've talked about thus far. All right? And the last thing I'll tell you, because I'm finished, but the last thing I want to mention again is, of course, I is, again, your assignment. All right, the first one you have to do is one we did in class. So if you weren't here in class the other day, on Monday, all we did was we took the original BMI program, made a copy of it, and added if statements in here to handle the person's weight being optimal, overweight, or underweight. All right, so you're supposed to do that. Okay, so that was the first one. The other one that you're going to do from scratch, so to speak, is number 5, the distance converter. All right, I don't care if you want to actually go into the English metric system. I didn't do that. I just used it inches, feet, and yards. This is how mine looks. So you can put in a number here. You should use your try parse. All right, and you can do an int, just allow whole numbers, that's fine. And if I click here, that says I want to go from inches. If I click here, I want to say how many, if I put in 100. 100 inches equal how many feet? 100 inches equal how many yards, etc. And again, what I've done for you here is out on the P drive, and I should mention this because Ben was good enough that he found some files that were hard to open. If you ever try to open up something on the P drive, you copy it to your folder and you can't, let me know right away, and I can let IT know, because it's possible that something got set on there that shouldn't have been set or whatever. Stuff happens. All right, but there's the Chapter 4 executables. So there's the BMI. You just double-click on that file. It's the executable file. So again, it handles, non-numeric, etc. But if I put in now, it not only figures out the BMI, but it says you're either of optimal weight, or you're overweight, or you're underweight for your height. All right? And I want you to do it that way. There's jokes on this. It's like I'm not overweight, I'm under tall type of thing. No, I want you to do it the way they showed it in the book. All right? And the other one, the distance converter. So again, if I put 100 in here, and I go from inches to yards, that says there's 2.78 yards in 100 inches. If I go to feet, there's 8.33 feet. He says account for the fact that if you go from inches to inches, so I just put up a message box that said they're the same, there's no conversion, and I made it 100 down here. Does it make sense what you're being asked to do for both assignments? So it will be lab all next week. Then the following week, which is the week of the 23rd, I believe, that week we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to be going into Chapter 5. And then the week after that is the week before break. Our break week is the week of the 9th. So we'll meet the next 3 weeks after this week, and then you'll be off for a week. All right, so I want to be through Chapter 5 by the time that we get to the break. All right, so if there are any other questions, I'm finished. Question was, do I want you to use the decimal variable? Really, it's up to you. Since you're doing calculations here that are with feet and inches, you could make a case either way. So you can use double. I use double in mine. But if you want to use decimal, that's fine too. All right. Again, that's it.